the family dinner table once a week and have a lot of arguments about extraterrestrials and why are they here, where are they from, and this went on and on. That was my entree into the UFO. Well, that was where I became active with the subject. So from that point on, I read all of George Adamski's books, and it sparked in me something that is the reason why I'm here today. But that was in 1988 when we actually got involved with the organisation. And I read a lot of other contactee information, and I understand why people around the world were so excited about it. Because remembering this is post-war time as well, so people, I think when people are traumatised, they tend to look to otherworldly explanations for things, or why are things so? It's sort of like an emotional driver within us all. So when we can't find answers in this physical reality, we sometimes are spurred on to look into other realities. And that's not to say that extraterrestrials are from other realities, but it's not to say that they aren't either. And it may be a combination of both. So from there, I read, there's Aldo, he'll be proud, Orfeo Angelucci, and Van Tassel, and George Hunt Williamson, and Truman Bethram, and all those people who were relevant around at that time. And they were the Stephen Greers and the Whitley Strieber's of today, right? So I found their work very interesting because as a collective of knowledge, a collection of knowledge, those contactees, for me, were really holding up a model for humanity of how we could live on planet Earth in the future. And it was a positive model, and I was looking for answers to how we could get from point A to point B. How can we ourselves become an advanced society? How can we get through times of struggle without war? How do we, progress with our ability to heal ourselves? How do we progress to what I think is seeded within all of us, is that need to live in a utopian environment? And I think, I don't know whether you feel like that, but that certainly is a driver for me. So, and for me, that collection of knowledge, provided that, I guess you could say, manual in a way, because these people were claiming anyway that they were speaking to extraterrestrials who'd been through that evolution. And I would encourage all of you to read those books if you can. You can't always get them. They're mostly out of print now, but if you get your hands on one of those, keep it. There were various people. For me, when I first got involved, I was mainly reading about contactees who were men. And I was thinking, where are all the women? But they are around. They're out there, and as Kitty will tell you, where are you, Kitty? Elizabeth Clara is one of them. You need to read her book as well. That's Klarer, who had an experience when she was in South Africa. South Africa, yeah. So, and I think I actually heard of her through Cynthia Hind, who was a well-known UFO researcher in South Africa at the time, who's now deceased. But anyway, one of the things that strikes me about the contactees is they have these experiences, and then they tended to go on and form spiritual organisations. And some of those people were George Van Tassel, George Hunt Williamson, Daniel Fry, George Adamski, sort of, in that a lot of people followed the books that he put out on telepathy, and they formed groups together and studied those books, and I studied those as well many years ago. So, and that's not unlike people who have close encounters today. Their experiences tend to, put them on some sort of a spiritual path if they weren't already, and if they were, it's magnified a lot. So in a way, their experiences spiritualise them, if you will, or catalyse that spiritual nature within them. So, and a lot of them were artistic. Daniel Fry wrote quite a lot of prose, not terribly good, but not too bad either. So he and Howard Menger, it's Menger, but actually I think it's Menger. He was a sign painter. A lot of people, Orfeo Angelucci loved to tinker with things, and he was, an amateur inventor, I suppose. So to me, the more even though the contactees happened in the 40s and 50s, and then in the 90s we had this huge skyrocket of alien abduction reports, the things, the changes within the people, the paranormal, or not paranormal, the personality traits are very similar of both groups of people. And I look for those when I'm reading the reports and taking them on the phone. So anyway, I was just going to start off by talking about, there was a fellow, I don't know a lot about this man, I just thought I'd tell you his story because I found it interesting. It was Wayne Aho, and some of you might have heard of him, who claimed to have a cosmic initiation in the Mojave Desert in 1957 when he was he was summoned telepathically to the desert while at the Giant Rock Convention. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Where he encountered a beautiful, majestic, egg-shaped light that was given off by a spacecraft. And he claims that the extraterrestrial crew guided him through a number of unusual experiences, including a military-style inspection of their ranks. And he formed the group later on called Cathedral of the Stars. Now, when he was 12, he'd heard a voice telling him that he'd be able to do something great for humanity in later life. And he actually joined the army as a young man and eventually rose to the rank of major during World War II. So, several additional experiences, similar to the one he had in childhood, occurred in the years after the war. And among the more vivid was a vision of a crack in the earth as a result of an impending atomic war. And if you remember, or some of you, actually those of you who've read it, would know that a lot of the contactees warned about, playing around with bombs at the time, atomic bombs. Anyway, then in 1957, while attending the Giant Rock Convention, he claimed he was lured away at a distance of some 2 miles from the convention site, and that was where a saucer landed. On the ground, once on the ground, the saucer, an object of another dimension, which he referred to, it actually vanished, but Aho received telepathic messages presenting him with a mission in life. And that evening he had an intense visionary experience that he described as a cosmic initiation. Just goes on. He did get involved, unfortunately, with Otis T. Carr, who was arrested for fraud later on, but Aho was dismissed as not being fully aware of the whole situation. I don't know what that means, but by the 1980s, this Wayne Aho faded into obscurity. But that's just one small example of someone. But this idea of a cosmic initiation, it really, in some ways it is that sort of experience. And I think that the people who have these experiences are disturbed themselves. And when they tell their story, they disturb society. And in a strange, counterintuitive way, it's almost like, they're almost needed to disturb society at that time, in that time that they live. That's my perspective of it anyway. Back to the convention. I found this one yesterday. I thought it was a classic because you've got on the left Orfeo Angelucci, then you've got George Van Tassel, Frank Scully and George Hunt Williamson. So it's a classic of those 4 people together. And they are all significant in their own right in what they brought to the UFO community at that time. And the Giant Rock Interplanetary Spacecraft Convention was actually out in the desert on a giant, we're next to a giant rock. And I think if I show you, it's up there, it'll come up to it. And people used to come for, a long way away, and there were thousands of people. I think the one year they had 10,000 people there. Can you imagine that? 10,000 people interested in the UFO subject all getting together. But anyway, anyone who had anything to do with the UFO subject, contactees, people who were interested in the subject, they all came there every year for that convention. And back in 1992, there was a guy here called Gary Wiseman who actually hosted probably, I think, the first UFO conference in Brisbane, and where Bud Hopkins came out. And one of the side speakers was a woman called Rosemary Decker, and she was from MUFON in the United States, and she stayed with me. Rosemary's probably dead now because that was a long time ago, but she was already well into her 70s then. But she was telling me that she used to go to these conventions, and one year she went and she was sitting there with her family. People would take picnics and they'd sit there during the day and just listen to people talking about UFOs, aliens, flying saucers. Didn't talk about flying UFOs then. And this person appeared to her, a man, but he only appeared like from the waist up. He didn't have any legs, and she was convinced that he was a holographic projection from some sort of spaceship, and he just disappeared. That was it. No interaction, no nothing. So, and Rosemary was she dotted her I's and crossed the T's. She was no flake. If you don't take offence to anybody, but you know what I'm saying. So she really had a strange experience that she couldn't explain. Anyway, so George Van Tassel used to organise these events, and Van Tassel has his own story to tell. He came to Giant Rock after the Kritzers, they'd already set up shop there basically, and then Van Tassel took over later after, took over. He moved in with his family. Kritzer had died, and then he, I don't know whether the little airport there was already existed or Van Tassel started it, can't really remember, but he ran that for about 16 years. And Van Tassel was really interesting because as a small child, his family described him as smart and a reader and always inventing something. He was a charismatic speaker and leader, and he possessed both extensive electrical knowledge and a sensitivity to spiritual matters as well. And some believe that those qualities made him a good leader in his own right, or candidate for receiving from an alien culture the plans for building an electrical human regenerator, the Integratron, in the California desert. And I'm sure some of you would have heard of this. It was a dome-shaped device which measures 50 feet in diameter and 38 feet high. It was built near Landis, California from 1954 to 78, and its claim was to be able to rejuvenate the human body, but that went untested because Van Tassel actually died shortly before it was completed. And much of the equipment that was in it was stripped after following his death. Now, this is very interesting to me because a lot of the abductees who contacted us in the 1990s, they would report to us that they had information which put into their heads while they had their experiences, and that became, referred to as the alien download. And I find that really, really curious, because Van Tassel wasn't the only person who claimed to have information from, that sort of technology from outer space. So again, there's a connection there to modern reports as well as the older reports too. Anyway. So after that, Van Tassel established a non-sectarian, non-profit organisation for religious and scientific research. One was called the Ministry of Universal Wisdom in 1957, followed by the College of Universal Wisdom. So again, you have that, expression in a spiritual way of, that experience within the person. He wrote 6 books about his out-of-world experiences, including I Rode a Flying Saucer. Another one too was Howard Menger. I've always said Menger, but I've been told it's Menger, by Howard Menger himself, I think, in a clip I'm about to show you. He had an experience when he was 12, and where he met a beautiful angelic woman. And again, we have in some of the early contactee accounts, people talking about contactees talking about meeting extraterrestrials who were, attractive. Some of them wore beautiful clothes. I think in one of George Adamski's descriptions, he talked about being on the spaceship and how they had this beautiful fabric that some of the women were wearing. This is a photo that he claimed to have taken, and for a long time I thought that being here was a man, but actually it's a woman, just wearing some sort of a spacesuit. Now here's a photo of him and his wife, and supposedly with an alien light form with them. Make of that what you will. When he spoke to the woman, that photo before here, this was later on, as an adult, the ship landed, she came out, and she touched something on her belt. Oh, thank you. And which is here, and touching some sort of control on her belt. This is actually a still from his footage, which is interesting. I've got some here. So he claimed to have been taken up in a spaceship, gone to the other side of the moon. He actually had a Polaroid camera with him at the time, and he took various photos. This is supposedly one of them, from one of those spaceships, showing a dome of a building on the moon. A photo of his friend from Venus. Interesting. This is one book he wrote, The High Bridge Incident, which is well known from that time. I'll just play a clip of him speaking. I think this is the clip that just starts off with Dan Fry, so he just starts initially, but just play it. Yeah. Fry asserted that he talked with the pilot named Alan, who gave Fry information on physics, the prehistory of Earth, including Atlantis and Lemuria, and the foundation of civilization. Again, he's passed on some information that, not unlike what the alien abductees reported in their experiences too. In 1954, Fry published his first book called The White Sands Incident, and a year later started an organisation called Understanding, which published a monthly newsletter by the same name. I think I've got a shot of their stand at the convention. There we are. Yeah. Now he was a peace activist. He believed that we could have peace on the planet if we could all just communicate. So he always promoted this this idea of understanding. And again, not unlike modern abductees / contactees, a lot of them become very driven that we have to have peace on the planet. People. Now here's an interview of Dan Fry, which I'd like to play, just for 6 minutes.
Dr. Dan Fry, you have been on an extraterrestrial vehicle, on a spaceship which is supposed to have entered the Earth's atmosphere from outer space. How was it? What did actually happen? And when?
It took place on the evening of the 4th of July, way back in the year 1950. It occurred at the White Sands Proving Grounds near Las Cruces, New Mexico, where I was employed at that time, to set up instrumentations for testing of some large rocket motors. The event was simply the setting down to Earth of a sampling device, which apparently was being used at that time to take samples of Earth's atmosphere at ground level, various isolated points on the surface of the planet. This apparently was controlled by from at least a much larger craft, which at that time was some 900 miles from the air in the shadowed side of the planet where it wouldn't be visible. One individual from this group might take up extended residence on this planet, and if this was to be done, then they would have to acclimate themselves to this environment. That this was estimated to require about 4 years of Earth time. It was a little optimistic. It actually required almost 5, almost exactly 5 years.
It has been stated by them, by these humanoids, and it has also been stated in at least in one of your books, that this the ancestors of these humanoids actually came from planet Earth, where did they move from here? It has been stated in your book that they came from a planet having 50% of the Earth's gravity. There is no such planet in the solar system.
The statement was approximately 50% of the Earth's gravity. This wouldn't be very far from the gravity of Mars, for example, which is approaching that or a little less. But the gravity which was described here was the artificial gravity created in the ship itself. This individual had never set foot on a planet in his life until he set foot on the Earth. It was the first planet on which he had ever set foot. He and his ancestors before him, for some generations, had been born aboard this large ship. It is not a vehicle, it is a home. It is a thing that we are preparing to build in our own space program. We are developing the ecological systems which will permit a vehicle to become essentially independent of a planet.
Does this imply that these humanoids were coming from very far? Not from a solar system?
I don't think that they were ever very far.
These humanoids claim that their very far ancestors living on planet Earth had developed a very high civilization, a high technology. Well, there have been actually not tradition found in human, on the earthbound folklore of this pre-ancient civilization, or is there?
Well, I think that there is. We have in our reference book library in Oregon some 50 to 60 books which contain this tradition and folklore. And it is, of course, not precise and detailed because most of it has come down from one person to another, from father, son, through periods when there was no written language in the area.
The aim of these humans. Why? Why did they pay that much attention to the tiny planet?
Well, probably most of them don't. As I say, we have records throughout all of our history of the occasional approach of such things. Usually they come and go very quickly. I would call this the tourist group. They're going from one point to another, and they haven't become close enough to see it. Yeah, they come close enough to see that this planet is occupied, and they have a little curiosity, but no real interest.
They come like to the zoo.
Yes, that's right. And there may be some who we would call a missionary group who arriving here and seeing that we are in a condition of crisis here, in a condition, I might say, which comes sooner or later to every civilization, no matter where it develops.
And your task in this connection, what is it?
Well, I don't know that I really have any task. I have had the opportunity to assist somewhat this individual in what he is doing. And this has been both an opportunity and responsibility. And I feel only the responsibility to answer questions on the subject. I feel no responsibility whatever to convince anyone that it is true.
This is the unjust.
This was a very strange, one of the photos that he was famous for, but I've read various research which proved it was fake. Why do they fake these things? I don't know. Maybe they feel they need some sort of physical evidence to back up their story, hard stories, etc. Who knows? Now, I'm not going to go into the Hill case, or Betty Hill here will explain her case, but just quickly, who does, or maybe I won't, who hasn't heard of the Betty Barney Hill case, and who hasn't? You all heard. So you all know everything about that. That's great, so I'll skip that.
There's a few.
But it is interesting to hear her speak. On YouTube, you can, this was back in 2009, before she died. I think she died in 2010, someone can correct me. And there's 5 clips of her talking. But can I just have the lights, please, someone? The interesting thing about the Hills case is a lot of the information, and particularly in these clips, was revealed through hypnosis. And this is, after this case, hypnosis started to become quite popular, particularly in the 90s when people were reporting close abduction experiences and they wanted to have hypnosis, or some people did. And I was finding that through that decade that a lot of cases hypnosis was involved. Now, a conference in 2001, which was a disaster because of the 9/11 thing, I gave a presentation about the relevance of hypnosis to UFO research. So I went through the interrupted journey very carefully because as a hypnotherapist I was interested in hypnosis transcripts, and I did find that they were quite leading by, what was the doctor's name, I forgot now, but and he was making quite a lot of suggestions in his questions to Barney and to Betty. And when you go back and read the introduction to the book of the basic story of what happened, and then the rest of it is filled in through hypnotic regression. Now, I've had a lot of people over the years say, can you hypnotise me because I want to find out if I'd had an abduction experience. And I said, well, that's just not how it works, because it's not a truth serum. When you do have hypnosis, you can't guarantee the information that is revealed anyway as exact, because you're accessing the unconscious mind, which is really the creative mind unleashed. So that's very difficult to, unless you've got corroborating evidence for every single bit of information that is revealed, it's very difficult to say yay or nay about it. But and in their case, a lot of that information was filled in through hypnotic regression. Not unlike the Betty Andreasen case as well. She had close encounters. Some of them were out. She reported to be out of her body as well, but physical close encounters. And she had a couple of sessions with a hypnotherapist. But that hypnotherapist then taught her husband how to do memory recall with hypnosis. So a lot of those books are jam-packed with information that he supposedly brought out in here as well. So you've got to really be careful about what you're reading there. But, it's sort of like 1961, we've got the Hill case. It's not the first abduction experience reported, but it's the first well-documented, as far as I'm aware, abduction experience, and therefore it's significant. Now, with the Betty and Barney Hill case, what I find very interesting is they were both, Betty was a social worker, and she was a European, and Barney, her husband, was an African American. He worked for the post office, but both were dedicated political activists, and people who report close encounters and abduction experiences, they're also activists. They can become activists. So if you read, there's a report out called the Roper Report that came out in 1991. If you read that, sorry I'm racing, but I'm just trying to get all this information in, that it says that the people who report close encounters typically are the influential people. They're in society, so they're the people who write letters to the editor, the people who will get involved in community groups, the people who will, they'll put their hand up to do things. They'll get involved in their society in some way, even if it's, giving up their time to, go and help at the library or something, but they'll tend to be people who, they make their own decisions, they walk their own path, they don't tend to follow other people. They have a mind of their own, and they're often highly strung, but that's okay too. Now Barney, just to finish this off, Barney was appointed to serve as legal redress for the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, as well as on the US Civil Rights Commission at that time. So they really didn't want to have all that attention. In fact, at the time when they reported their experiences, which actually was picked up by journalists and went to the papers of Boston, then it just got out of hand, they really didn't want to have anything to do with that, but that's how they became well known. So here we have, early years of the Space Brothers being reported, and then we have the alien abduction experiences. And then around 2000 they changed again, so you had mixed motive cases. So you had abduction experiences and angelic light visitations as well. And they I found that was coming out then. So, very confusing. What do you make of it? I don't know, but it's a phenomenon in evolution. So the whole point of this topic is to give you a broader panorama of the subject and a bit of the history of the modern day.